It was a normal Friday afternoon. I was 24, working a regular office job in Chicago, and I had taken a few days off just to get out of the city. I rented a small cabin up in northern Michigan, somewhere quiet, isolated, where I could spend a weekend alone. I had no one with me, no plans other than reading, cooking, and hiking around the area. Everything was supposed to be calm, uneventful. The drive there was easy, and the road narrowed as I got closer. Pine trees crowded the sides, and the sunlight slanted between the branches, making the forest feel peaceful. When I finally saw the cabin, I felt a small relief. It looked exactly like the pictures, small, wooden, set back from the dirt road. The kind of place you imagine for a quiet weekend away. I parked the car, unloaded my bag, and stepped inside. The cabin smelled like wood and old furniture. It was warm, quiet, and exactly what I expected. I spent the first hour unpacking and making a cup of coffee. The living room was empty except for a couch and a small TV. The kitchen was clean, everything in its place. I looked out the window at the forest stretching into the distance. Nothing seemed out of place. The sun was low, and I could hear birds in the trees. It was normal, calm, exactly how I wanted it to be. Then I noticed something. A door at the back of the cabin, which should have been closed, was slightly open. Not much, maybe an inch, just enough to cast a thin shadow across the floor. I didn't remember leaving it like that. I walked over and pushed it shut, thinking maybe the wind had moved it. But the strange part was that the lock on that door didn't work properly, and it felt like it had been forced open at some point. My stomach sank a little. I shook it off. Maybe the previous renter had left it like that, I told myself. The cabin had been empty for a few weeks before I arrived. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had been inside recently. I checked the other doors and windows. Everything else was fine. It was just that one door. As I poured my coffee, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The air felt heavier than before. The forest outside looked darker, like the shadows were moving in ways they shouldn't. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but it was enough to make me pause. Everything was supposed to be normal, supposed to be quiet. But in that small moment, standing in a cabin I thought I'd be alone in, I felt it, the first hint that maybe I wasn't. I didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning. A normal weekend getaway had just become something else. Something I couldn't explain. And it all started with a single door that shouldn't have been open. The cabin was small but comfortable, tucked deep in the Michigan woods. It sat at the end of a long dirt road, surrounded by tall pine and birch trees. The kind of place where the forest feels endless, and the nearest neighbor could be miles away. From the outside, it looked cozy. Weathered wood siding, a small porch with 2 chairs, and a fireplace chimney peeking above the roof. Inside, the walls were a light pine, the floors creaked slightly when I walked, and the windows gave me a full view of the dense forest. Everything felt simple, ordinary, exactly what I had hoped for when I booked the weekend. It was early evening when I arrived. The sun had dipped just below the horizon, and the forest cast long shadows across the ground. The air was crisp and smelled faintly of pine and damp earth. Birds and small animals had gone quiet, and the only sound was the faint rustle of wind through the trees. I lit a lamp in the living room, giving the cabin a soft, warm glow. Outside, darkness was beginning to gather, and I could see the first hints of stars appearing above the trees. I had come here to get away from work and the city. The past few months had been stressful, long hours, tight deadlines, endless emails. I needed a break. No Wi-Fi, no phone service, just a couple of days to relax, read a book, and maybe take a short hike in the woods. I told my best friend about the trip, but no one else knew where I was. I wanted it to be quiet, private, the kind of solitude that feels safe but refreshing. The cabin itself was simple. A small kitchen with a gas stove and fridge, a living room with a worn couch and an old TV, and a single bedroom upstairs. There was a small bathroom with a shower, everything basic but clean. I unpacked my bag slowly, placing clothes in the tiny closet and setting a few personal items on the counter. I made a cup of coffee, then walked over to the window to look at the forest. The air was still, but the shadows in the trees seemed to shift in subtle ways. I chalked it up to the fading light and my tired eyes. There were no other people around. The neighbors were at least a mile away, and the road I had driven down was empty. Occasionally, I heard a car pass in the distance, but mostly, the silence of the forest surrounded me. That was part of why I loved the place. The quiet was almost tangible, almost peaceful. It made the cabin feel like a sanctuary, like a place where nothing bad could happen. But even in that calm, ordinary setting, there were small things that didn't quite fit. The faint creak of a floorboard upstairs, a rustle outside when the wind wasn't blowing, and that lingering sense that I wasn't entirely alone. At the time, I ignored it, telling myself I was just adjusting to being in the woods. I didn't know that these subtle hints were the first threads of a weekend that would turn into something I'd never forget. The first few hours passed without incident. I tried to relax, reading a book on the couch and sipping coffee. The forest outside was quiet, and the cabin felt safe. But as darkness settled in, small things began to feel off. It started with noises. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Not the kind of creak you expect from an old house settling, but deliberate, slow, like someone had stepped lightly and then paused. I froze, listening. Another creak followed, then a faint scrape. I told myself it was probably nothing. The cabin was old. Maybe the previous renters had left something loose. Maybe a branch had fallen against the siding. Still, I felt a flicker of unease I couldn't shake. Then there were the shadows. The living room lamp cast a warm glow, but the corners of the room seemed darker than they should have been. At one point, I thought I saw a movement, a flicker at the edge of my vision, but when I turned, nothing was there. The trees outside had long since merged into the darkness, and the shadows inside felt like they were stretching toward me. I tried to laugh it off, blaming tired eyes and imagination. The next sound was harder to ignore. A soft tapping on the window near the kitchen. Not loud, not violent, just a steady, slow rhythm. I went to check. The glass was clear. Nothing. I stepped back, heart beating a little faster. Maybe a branch had hit it. Maybe an animal. That explanation made sense, but it didn't erase the uneasy feeling in my stomach. I moved around the cabin, checking doors and windows. Everything was locked secure. The back door that had been slightly ajar earlier was now shut properly, and the lock clicked when I tested it. Still, the sense of being watched persisted. Even sitting in the living room, sipping coffee, I felt eyes on me. I told myself it was just paranoia. I was alone, after all, in a quiet forest. Nothing could be here. Then came the breathing. Soft, slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere upstairs. I froze, listening, certain I hadn't heard it before. The air felt heavier, and the forest outside seemed impossibly dark. I wanted to call someone, but the cell signal was weak, barely enough to send a text. I stood there, flashlight in hand, staring at the stairs. The breathing stopped the moment I moved. Just like that, gone. I tried to ignore it and focused on small tasks, tidying up, washing a cup, making another coffee. But the feeling persisted. Every so often, I would hear another floorboard creak, a whisper of movement, something shifting in the shadows. The cabin felt alive in a way that wasn't natural. I kept telling myself it was the wind, the house settling, my imagination. By the time I went upstairs to the bedroom, I couldn't shake the growing unease. The shadows in the hall seemed longer, darker. The stairs creaked under my weight, louder than they should have. And as I reached the top, I glanced into the hallway, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw someone standing there. Just a shadow, a shape too quick to identify. My pulse jumped, and I realized this was no longer just imagination. Something wasn't right. By the time night fully settled in, the cabin no longer felt safe. I was upstairs in the bedroom, trying to read, but I couldn't focus. Every sound made me flinch. The wind rattling a window, a branch tapping the siding, even the creak of the floor under my own feet. But these weren't normal creaks anymore. They were deliberate, too patterned, almost like someone was pacing slowly just out of sight. I went to the window and peered outside. The forest was dark, impossibly so, the trees blending into one black mass. Nothing moved, nothing at first. But then, a shadow passed quickly across the edge of the clearing. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was too fast to be a deer. My stomach dropped. Someone or something was outside. I checked the doors again. The front door and back door were locked, but a small back window in the kitchen was slightly cracked. I couldn't remember leaving it like that. I leaned closer and looked outside. Nothing, just the dark, the trees, the faint outline of the dirt road. I closed the window and locked it tightly, but the uneasy feeling lingered. I felt trapped. The cabin that had seemed like a sanctuary now felt like a cage. Then the noises started again, closer this time. A slow shuffle upstairs, right above the bedroom. My heart began to pound. I stopped breathing, listening. The sound of someone walking slowly, deliberately, from one end of the cabin to the other. Not random footsteps. These were calculated, careful. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Someone was inside, moving through the house. I grabbed my phone, but there was barely any signal. I couldn't call for help. I thought about running, going downstairs and out the front door, but what if he was waiting there? What if he had already been watching me for hours? My mind raced with possibilities I didn't want to imagine. The shuffling continued, and then came a soft tapping on the ceiling above me. Not loud, but distinct. Someone was walking right above my head. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering, trying to think calmly. The cabin no longer felt empty. I wasn't imagining things anymore. There was someone in the house. Someone who didn't belong. I crept to the bedroom door and cracked it open slightly, trying to peer into the hallway. It was dark, but I could see the outline of the hall. I froze. Something moved, a shadow. Too tall and too solid to be a trick of the light. It moved slowly toward the stairs. I swallowed hard, trying to control my breathing. The more time passed, the more obvious it became. This wasn't random. He knew I was here. He had been inside, hiding, watching. And now he was moving, getting closer. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to get out of that house. But I had no plan, no clear escape. I was trapped in a quiet cabin in the middle of the forest, and the person, or people, inside were deliberate, patient, and dangerous. I backed away from the door, trying to think. I had to stay calm. I had to find a way out before it was too late. But the footsteps didn't stop. The cabin was no longer a peaceful place. It was a trap, and I could feel the danger closing in. I finally realized I couldn't stay in the bedroom. The footsteps were coming closer, moving toward the stairs. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he could hear it. I grabbed the flashlight off the nightstand and turned it on, sweeping the beam down the hallway. That's when I saw him. A man, standing at the top of the stairs, partially hidden in the shadows. He didn't say anything. He didn't move immediately. He just watched me. I froze for a moment, unable to decide what to do. Then instinct kicked in. I ran. I dashed down the stairs, nearly tripping over the last step, and he moved faster than I expected, stepping into the hall and blocking part of the way. I could see the knife in his hand now, glinting faintly in the flashlight's beam. I swallowed a scream and turned, running toward the back door. It was locked. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn it. Behind me, I heard him moving, each step deliberate, heavy, closer than I wanted it to be. I managed to twist the lock and fling the door open, stumbling into the cold night. The air hit me like a wall. The forest was black, the dirt road ahead barely visible. I ran without looking back, branches whipping my arms and face, the sound of footsteps behind me growing faint but never fully gone. I made it to my car, keys in hand, but I froze. The engine wouldn't start at first. My fingers fumbled over the ignition. I glanced over my shoulder and thought I saw him standing at the edge of the trees, just watching. I slammed my foot down on the pedal, and the car roared to life. I didn't stop to look at the cabin. I drove down the dirt road as fast as I could, turning onto the main highway and finally reaching a place where I could call the police. By the time they arrived, the cabin was quiet. Too quiet. They searched every room, every corner. They found him. He had been hiding in the attic. Knives scattered in small piles, evidence that he had been in the house for days, maybe weeks, waiting. He hadn't said a word or tried to attack me directly, but I realized how close I had come to something much worse. I was shaking so badly, I could barely speak when the officers asked questions. I still remember the way he looked, even in the shadows of the attic. Calm, patient, almost casual, like this wasn't unusual for him. It was horrifying to think that he had been inside my cabin, waiting while I thought I was completely alone. Every creak, every shadow I had noticed, every small noise I had tried to ignore, it had all been him, moving, watching, planning. I left the cabin that night and never went back. The police caught him, questioned him, but he never explained why he was there or how long he had been hiding. I didn't care to know. I only knew that if I hadn't run when I did, things could have ended very differently. The next morning, the police returned to the cabin to continue their search. I stayed in town, trying to calm down and process what had happened. When they called me later with details, I realized just how close I had come to real danger. The man in the attic wasn't a random trespasser. He had been living there for weeks. Small piles of clothes, food wrappers, and even a blanket tucked into the corner suggested he had been fully prepared to stay unnoticed. He had been inside the cabin before I even arrived. That meant every sound I thought was a creak of the floor, every shadow that flickered in my peripheral vision, every faint noise in the night, it had all been him. Watching. Waiting. The police found more than just evidence of his presence. There were knives hidden in several locations, not just one or two. Some were sharpened, others wrapped carefully. There were even old photographs scattered around, photos of the cabin, the surrounding forest, and most chilling of all, my car parked outside. I realized that he had seen me arrive, had watched me unpack, had probably been following my every move for hours before I even knew it. When the officers asked questions about the attic, they mentioned something that made my stomach drop. He had built a small false wall in one corner, a space barely large enough to sit or lie down. From that vantage point, he could see almost every part of the cabin, including the bedroom where I had slept and the hallway I had crossed so many times. He had been hiding in plain sight the entire weekend. The strangest part was the way he reacted when confronted. He didn't fight, didn't speak. He simply sat in the attic corner as if he belonged there, as if the cabin was his, not mine. The police couldn't explain it. He refused to answer questions, didn't provide a motive. They only confirmed that he had a criminal record for trespassing and stalking, but nothing that made him seem capable of this level of patience and stealth. It hit me then. The quiet noises, the shadows, the breathing, the small movements I had noticed, they weren't random or imagined. Every subtle clue, every tiny sign that something was wrong, had been real. He had been inside my cabin, observing me the whole time, and I hadn't known. I had brushed off every warning, telling myself it was just the wind or my imagination. I realized that I hadn't escaped danger by luck alone. I had escaped because I had finally recognized the signs in time. Every creak, every shadow, every faint sound was a warning. I hadn't understood it in the moment, but now it all made sense. He had been deliberate, patient, and terrifyingly calculated. Even now, weeks later, I think about the attic. About the man who could hide for days, unseen, and watch without anyone realizing. I replay every sound I heard that night, every shadow I saw, and the realization still chills me. He had been there. He had been inside my cabin. And I had come face to face with someone who had been waiting for me all along. Weeks have passed since that night at the cabin, but the memory hasn't faded. I returned to the city, tried to go back to work, tried to act normal, but something inside me changed. I keep thinking about the man in the attic. The police caught him, questioned him, and even took him into custody, but there are still questions that haunt me. Questions they couldn't answer. Questions I can't stop asking myself. Who was he really? The records said he had a criminal history, but nothing that fully explained the patience, the calculation, the way he had been able to hide in that small space for days without anyone noticing. Was he watching other people before me? How many cabins had he broken into? Had he done this many times before, moving from one isolated place to another, waiting for the right moment? Sometimes, late at night, I feel a presence even here in my apartment in the city. It's subtle, a shadow moving in the corner of a room, a branch tapping against the window, a floorboard creaking when I know no one is home. I tell myself it's paranoia. I tell myself I'm safe now. But the fear doesn't go away. I can't help thinking he's still out there somewhere, hiding, waiting, watching. Even more unsettling is what I realized after talking to the police about the cabin. There was no clear motive, no explanation for why he had chosen that particular place, or me. He didn't steal anything. He didn't leave a message. He just stayed.
Watched.
Waited. The fact that someone could do that, silently and deliberately, with no warning, no reason that makes sense, it's hard to shake. I think about the signs I ignored, the noises I brushed off, the shadows I thought were tricks of the light. Every small clue had been real. Every instinct I had tried to dismiss was accurate. And yet I only survived because I ran at the right moment, because I got lucky. That thought makes me shiver. What if I hadn't noticed the signs in time? What if he had chosen differently? Sometimes I drive past the woods near the cabin. I don't go in, I don't stop, but I look toward the edge of the trees. I can't tell if it's my imagination or something real, but sometimes it feels like I see him. A figure standing in the shadows, watching. He doesn't move, doesn't approach, just watches. The thought that he could still be out there, waiting for someone else, or even watching me again, is unbearable. I still don't know who he really was or why he was there. I only know that for a moment, I came face to face with someone capable of hiding in silence, blending into shadows, and waiting. And I also know that the world feels a little less safe now because the person who terrorized me exists somewhere, right now, and no one truly knows where. Sometimes, late at night, I can't sleep. I lie in bed and hear the tiniest noises, and my heart races. I keep telling myself I'm safe. But deep down, I know the truth. And that truth is simple, chilling, and unresolved. The man in the attic is still out there. And maybe, just maybe, he's still watching.